So the Melba's here and we are recording. So this is the follow-up meeting from the NECHI site visit. We have a kind of a small agenda, but it's kind of loaded. So Kirsten, do you want to start it, or do you want me to kind of go into it?
Yeah, I mean, I think our agenda is sort of talking through our takeaways from the NECHI experience, right?
Yeah.
And then doing a little bit of looking ahead. And then, as you probably noticed, we have some colleagues from student affairs here. So we'll talk through that. And then I just had a question for the group about value stuff. Just looking for some advice on that.
So I can start off with, so with our standard 8, we knew that we were going to run into some bumps. Kirsten and I had kind of prepped for it. I know that Bill was prepared for it, and Kim as well. We've been doing really well, and I think that should be stated. I was asked to do a one-on-one with one of the evaluators in regards to what I thought was going to be kind of exploring the assessment portal. And what it really came down to was a kind of a deep dive into our assessment practices. Some of it wasn't properly outlined in our self-study. And there were a lot of questions revolving around outcomes, why some programs have 33 outcomes, and that the evaluator was very blunt about it, saying that wasn't acceptable, saying that that's something that needed to be repaired, that he was really interested in the individual program assessment process. And I explained it to him, and luckily what I thought was going to be the exploring the portal, I had it open and ready. So I was able to go in and show evidence of the assessment process throughout all of the programs. And that made, in his own words, that made him a lot more comfortable with what we were doing with regards to assessment. He did highlight some specific programs that he was very concerned with regards to how they were engaging in their assessment process and why they felt that their external accreditation was superior to the NECHI accreditation. And so that is something that we're probably going to have to address once we got the final report and we can examine what the recommendations might be. But I think that it was a pretty good takeaway for me, and when I reported back to Kirsten about it, because it was things that we already knew that we had kind of stumbled on within the last 6 to 8 months, that in particular, I mean, it's not a big secret, the health studies programs were shielded for a while, and under the expectation that they have external accreditation, so they know what they were doing. And Kirsten and I stumbled upon the fact that there was some issues in those programs, that their external accrediting body was not looking at assessment the same way that NECHI looks at assessment. And that was something that was brought up to Scott. Scott recognized it, and it's something that's going to have to be on our action plan for the next year, is to catch them all, to get those programs up to what NECHI expectations are. I think the evaluator was correct in his statement that the external accrediting, in some ways, people have viewed it as more important. And I think that this group understands that without NECHI, your program, is how great it is, has no place to live without NECHI accreditation. So first and foremost, I feel bad for those programs that they might have to be doing 2 types of assessment. But it's something that we have to address. The other thing is that we recognized in the self-study that we were missing assessment outside of academics and that we needed some more representation. And I think I brought this back up to this group a while back and said that I'd like to bring in student affairs, student services in, and have them part of this group and to kind of establish where we are as a group and possibly maybe develop two subcommittees outside of this group. But this assessment of student learning should be the main body that we all feed into and communicate. So there is a possibility for that. And that is the reason why we have some additional members today, because I think it's critically important that we start to look at other areas that impact all of us. And it's not just about whether or not the student learning outcomes within a program or department. It's more so, are students gaining what they're supposed to be gaining, that we say that they're going to get through our mission statement and core academic skills. It goes back to that proverbial Tonka truck that I always use, that when you bring the box home and you've got the picture, and then you bring the box home and it's missing 3 wheels and a bumper and a dump bed. It's not what you paid for. And these students are paying for, I know some of you don't like the terminology, but they are paying for a product. And they come in the door and we tell them that this is what they're going to get. How do we ensure that they're getting what we tell them they're going to get? The only way to do that is through assessment. And I think it's important that student affairs and academic affairs comes together under an umbrella of this nature, and we start to look at student learning across the board. So with that being said, I think I've covered a little bit of information. Kirsten, what else did you want to add to that?
I mean, I think the point about the inconsistency with the learning outcomes is important. So one of the things that we had to do to get ready for NECHI, which I think several of you on here are aware, is we were asked to make sure that every program's page on the NECC website in the catalog has the program outcomes listed. And in that process, like that, I think was one of the first places that Scott and I recognized that there is an enormous amount of variation, right? So some of our programs have 3 or 4 very clearly outlined program outcomes. And then some people sent me literally a list of every single outcome from every individual class, and wanted me to put 37 different outcomes on the site. So I think, you know, we don't need to solve the problem today, but the other thing that the site visitor who was in charge of Standard 8, and Scott met with him separately about the portal. I met with him with Kevin Mitchell about our program review process. And then I was in several other meetings where he asked about assessment. It's pretty, I would be shocked if this wasn't a recommendation. We need to create a more coherent arrangement between our course level student outcomes, the program outcomes, and our institutional outcomes. He asked me in several different meetings, like, but what is your process for this? What is your system? How do all these things hang together? And the fact that I couldn't point to like a clear diagram or this is how we do it and this is our process, like, I think that is going to come back to bite us. So we should anticipate that our work next year is going to focus largely on helping individual programs clarify the difference between course outcomes, their program outcomes, and then mapping those specifically to our institutional learning outcomes, because that really seemed to be what they want people to do. I'm not going to trot it all out now because I will never find it, but Granite State in New Hampshire did that work recently. Kim and I met with the woman who is the dean of assessment up there, and that she shared a really nice model with us. So I'll pull some of those resources together and get them out. So there are other colleges in the area that have done that recently and also gone through their NECHI stuff. So there are some models, but to me, I think that was one of the biggest things. And I think Scott, when he went into that meeting with Scott, his sense really was that our assessment is incredibly disorganized, and that we don't really have, like, we are just asking people to fill out pieces of paper and then accepting that as assessment. And that really seemed to be his takeaway from like looking at our website, and which did not surprise Scott and I, because we spent several hours updating the assessment page on the website, and it was kind of a painful experience actually. So I think that that's really what we're going to be looking at. And to Scott's point about then, but bringing in student affairs and some of the other things, right? When we're really thinking about institutional outcomes, right? Those are academic and student affairs responsibilities. So, and then being able to kind of backtrack back down into how does that work at the program level and the course level, I think. So we're going to need to start really thinking about how everything is connected. So, I mean, the core academic skills are a part of that because they do provide us with those institutional outcomes. But I think the lines between each of those stages of assessment was not clear enough for our accreditors. So I think that's what we're going to get pushed on.
Yep. Does anybody have any thoughts? How to proceed? What do you think assessment will look like for starting in the fall?
Or any of you that were in NECHI meetings that heard other things or have other perspectives on what you think is going to come back to us. Because some of you were in meetings while Scott and I were off doing other things.
I do want to recognize that program review was the first
Yes, it was.
that they mentioned. So I thought that was really great.
Yeah.
You know, because it was recently revised and, you know, they saw it as really strong. So Sharon, take a bow. But I think, you know, I think that they saw the things that we knew that we need to, you know, improve and that we just use that as a lever to move us forward. So, you know, I think it's all good. Nobody is doing assessment perfect. Nobody. So,
Brian.
And my personal goal for Northern Essex is that, I don't know, Kirsten can determine the timeline, but in a couple of years that we feel like we are eligible to apply for the National Institute of Learning Outcomes Assessment Excellence designation.
Yes.
And that we, you know, use that as a goal and that we apply for that and then we get it.
Yeah.
Voila.
that would be a nice feather in the cap. So one of the other things that the evaluator had brought up was the focus of our how we complete the E-series. And as Kirsten had just mentioned, it was more like filling out a form. Mm-hmm. I think that everybody in this group sees the value of assessment. That's the reason we're here. We're in this group. One of the challenges I think that we're going to have over the next year or so is trying to get others to kind of think the way the rest of you think and coming up with strategies on, I think, as far as it at the faculty level, when we're thinking about the academic affairs, I think that those of us that are in this group that are faculty that are in a position to help other faculty, I think the burden lays on us, not Kim or Kirsten or Sharon. I think it really lays on our shoulders of trying to get the other faculty to see the value of assessment and why it's important beyond just filling out an E-series for NECHI in 5 and then 10 years. I think that we need to come up with strategies that bring people in. I tried to hold those workshops this past year, and it was interesting, not so interesting. Everybody that attended was somebody that was already engaged in assessment. The people that needed it the most weren't there. And I was just kind of more or less each workshop wasn't me presenting new information to the participants. It was me having a conversation about just clearing up how many outcomes are you assessing in a year. Go ahead, Habib.
I think before with more time in assessment, I was hoping like maybe the dean and the chair work together with faculty to standardize the outcome per course first. Once this goal is achieved, I think assessment will become more easier. And when you have like, I don't know, like 30, we offer like 30 courses and all of them have totally different outcomes. It's really hard to assess any of this course.
Yeah.
Which is why I would favor that we start at the top level that Kirsten just mentioned and work down.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
one of the things that was asked, the specific question was leadership at the college supportive of our assessment process. I don't think that we have an issue with leadership supporting us. And that's what I said to the evaluators. There's always money there. And Bill has always said, when I've gone to Bill and said, such and such a program is looking to do scoring for assessment, Bill has turned around and said, okay, there's money for it. There's money and support for it. So the one thing that I've heard across the board is that from chairs and coordinators is that you need more time to do this. And it's not just a one-day thing. And if that means that Kirsten and I've talked about it, maybe that's something that we'll have to advocate with the new academic vice president, is that maybe a course release to do assessment work, that's something that you're not going to just sit down on assessment day and then professional day will do a little bit more. And then at the end of the year, you're going to do a little bit more. We need to bring in the culture of assessment that this is something that you're doing throughout the semester and throughout the academic year, that you're continuously looking at these things. And the only way to do that is to provide the time to the chairs and coordinators or support faculty that can do this. So that's something that we're going to have to really advocate for. And I'm not familiar. I have a bunch of ideas for Jennifer's area, but obviously I'm not an expert in that area. And we can have a supportive role, but I'm sure that that's going to be the same type of issue as finding the time to do this. So I'm thinking ahead that this is something that we're all going to have to work towards in ensuring that you do have the time to do assessment properly, to respond to the evaluator's question. Do you have the support and do you have the time to do it? Well, we have the support, just don't think we have the time. And I think that's something that we need to work towards. Thank you, Elle. I appreciate it. So, with regards to anything else, like Kirsten had mentioned, did you pick up on anything regarding in your meetings? Did you pick up on anything that you kind of sent up a red flag to each of you during the site visit?
You know, I think actually the main red flag for me is that at least my level, you know, like department chair and standard issue faculty, we had like almost no interaction with the NECHI process. So it kind of leaves faculty able to just continue this attitude of like, that happens up here and I don't have to worry about it. I mean, you know, I like had been told to set aside time that week. And then I was like, well, I haven't been asked to do anything, so I guess it's fine. And then we just get sort of this general report afterwards. And that's me, and I'm interested in assessment, you know, let alone the rest of the faculty that are like, oh, did the NECHI thing happen? Was that like, especially, you know, with like, there wasn't an actual physical site visit. So there wasn't even any like people seeing things going on. It was just like, oh yeah, I guess that was last week. And then, you know, Lane's email. And that's a continued issue. And kind of to that point of like, does leadership support assessment? You know, Bill's approach that things should sort of bubble up from the faculty and then he would support them. That works insofar as the faculty are on board and are kind of saying, we'd like to do this. Can you give us support? The faculty in my department just are not on board with this. So, you know, like I can say, I think it's important, but they're like, yeah, you think a lot of things are important and, you know, we don't have time for this. So, you know, it's like, if it takes the faculty pushing and then Bill, you know, like Bill's office really does say like, yes, we have money, we have support. But if that's not coming from that bottom up approach and there isn't sort of a college level, like this is something we're committed to, you know, like the new approach to like the equity gap, where it's like the whole college is going to engage on this. And so everybody should be talking about it. And you can expect every faculty member to be able to say, this is what I'm doing on the equity gap. It needs to be the same thing on assessment, you know, get to the point where there is that culture where you can say like, well, how do you assess in your class? And it's not like people looking at you like, what do you mean? Like the exams I give students, like, what are you talking about? And that's kind of where we are right now. And it just feels like there's still that disconnect where I had zero contact with NECHI, except for that like exit forum that I attended that just seemed to be sort of like loosely defined. So I think there's still that disconnect will persist until you get a critical mass. and it's kind of chicken and egg. It's like how much of like the leadership needs to, do top down and say, this is a thing we're committed to. You faculty can figure out, you have a lot of autonomy to decide how you do it within your department, but the leadership needs to be there to say, but you have to do it. And that's the part that without that, at least my very independent minded crew of science faculty are like, no, thank you. I won't be doing that.
So I think as we plan ahead, I think that I've said this before, and I still truly believe in it. I think that this committee should have a larger role than what we already do. I think a lot of what we've been doing for the past few years is reporting back and kind of and having discussions in this group, but we really don't, once the meeting's over, we really don't go out and do stuff. And I think that's going to have to change, especially after we see the NETG report. Once that comes in, that'll give us some direction.
Yeah.
But I think that overall, I think that we really need to start to have more of an active role in developing the culture of assessment. And if that means that Kirsten and I have to meet with your department, Sarah, and we have a three-way meeting together, and then we go to the department meeting with objectives of this is how we are going to support Sarah in convincing the rest of the faculty that this is a necessary objective. And here is the NETG report that says it needs to be done. I think that is probably one of the best approaches, but then flip that around, we'll say that Brian's department is not as supportive either. So now, Sarah, you and I go into Brian's department with the same approach that we did with your department, and support the faculty and show them. But then it also comes down to what kind of check is the academic affairs vice president going to be able to write? Do we walk in there and go, yes, everything can get done? And then the new academic vice president goes, whoa, that's not in the budget. So we really need, I think Kirsten and Kim need to kind of say, what's being set aside for professional development regarding assessment? Meaning, are we doing a giant norming session for anybody that's involved with scoring artifacts or scoring outcomes with regards to student affairs or academic affairs? Do we have this giant training that does that faculty get a stipend for showing up and doing that type of training? So we start the ball rolling, looking at it like in that sense. But I think that our first giant step is, before we can make any hopes and dreams, is to look at that NETG report when it comes in, and then create some action plans regarding the recommendations. I think we're going to have a lot of action plans, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And I think that Kirsten has curriculum and policy, a side of assessment, and I'm just one person. And I think I'm going to be digging deep into health studies area once that report comes back, because I think that's where Scott and I had a conversation about that's probably going to need some help. Kind of like I did when I first started this 4 years ago, and sitting down with each individual department. But I think that's probably the best step, is waiting for that report and creating some action plans, and possibly holding a meeting once we have the report in hand, sending it out to all of you, and then possibly holding a meeting just to talk about your individual ideas on how to respond to these action plans. These recommendations, and then creating some action plans from that. Additional thoughts? I feel like I'm rambling.
I was going to say, so we've sort of talked about the NETG perspective from academic affairs and assessment and what we've heard, but since Jennifer, Donna, and Jonathan, you're here representing student affairs, and as Scott kind of alluded to, there was some discussion in NETG about including student affairs and assessment. Like, before we ramble on about these big elaborate plans, do any of you just want to talk briefly about sort of where you guys are at and why you're at that point, and just, I don't know, introduce yourself? Does everybody, I feel like we also skipped over introductions,
I think
all of that stuff.
Well, good morning to all of you, Scott and Kirsten. Thank you for inviting us. And I just want to say that we are fully committed in student affairs to really beginning this process of, how do we know that we've arrived to whatever that goal might be? So I will say, humbly speaking, some of us are relatively new, including myself. I'll continue to use that token up until I'm here 5 years, and then be careful. I just may renew I'm still new, but I am relatively new though. All jokes aside, I've been here about 1.5 years. And the bulk of that 1.5 years has been responding to COVID. So I haven't given a lot of thought to this topic, which when I saw Scott's email, I was like, yes, now, sure, I'm ready. Because this is something that we definitely need to get started on. During our NECHI process, though, I will say that one of the questions was about assessment for us, right? And that's where I began to dance around well, yeah, great question, fantastic, great, yes. And so that was one of the things that I wrote down as my takeaway, to really seriously start digging into what is the role that student affairs can play to ensure that our students are really gaining what we're hoping that they gain through our process, right? So, so I'll stop there. Aside from just sharing with you all that I'm definitely committed to this work. I did bring my 2 awesome deans with me, who are the leaders, and I'll let them introduce themselves as well, who are the leaders of enrollment services and student development. Which is where all of the great work happens. But I'm very excited about this conversation, to be very honest with you. I am very competitive in nature, and assessment is the one thing. I don't say it that much though, but I really am. But assessment is that one thing that helps me really understand if we are in the right, in the right track, right? How do I know? Look at your scoreboard, i.e. assessment. So I see the importance, and I'm ready and excited. I've been texting Donna and Jonathan as you've been talking, Scott, and I'm like, I'm so excited. So just so you know, I'm not just saying it. I have text messages to prove it. I've been multitasking. So there you have it. Donna, introduce yourself. Say hello to these awesome people that I think you know.
I think I know everyone. I think most of you know me. Donna Bertolino, Dean of Enrollment Services. As you know, I've been here for almost 35 years. Always in academic support. I became the Dean of Enrollment in January. So this is new to me, although I am not new to the college. Enrollment and student affairs is new to me. But I echo what Dr. Mesquita said. I'm really committed to this. I think it's really important work. And I feel like we have new leadership overall in student affairs. So we are excited to be working on this. And I know one of the things that came up at NECHI was about an enrollment plan. We don't actually have an enrollment plan, although we work with our dashboard team on enrollment, and we know what our numbers are. We're tracking, we're always creating goals. We don't have an overall enrollment plan. So that was one of the things that came up. So we do need to look at assessment in our area. So those are my thoughts.
It's my turn. My name is Jonathan Miller. I'm the Dean of Students. I've been at the institution for just under 1 year. I started on June 1st of last year. I have worked my entire time at the college remotely. However, I am in the office today. I have some experience with this, and I've been kind of quiet about it. And I think Dr. Mesquita knows this. I was responsible for instituting all institutional learning outcomes in student affairs at my previous institution.
Excellent.
So I can really get into the weeds on this. Is it my favorite topic? No, but can I do it? And do I understand it? And do I think I contribute to the team? Yes, absolutely.
So Scott and Kirsten, I think Jonathan just volunteered to take on all of our assessment. Donna, I think you and I can do this meeting right now.
That's exactly what I was attempting not to do, and that's why.
Jonathan, you're it.
Yeah, that's it. You're it.
I'm tagging you. You're it.
Well, I mean, that's excellent that you love it. And I'm sure that there's probably somebody in your area that you can kind of hand it off to a little bit and train on how to do it so that you don't own all of it. Because the more people we have involved in this, the better. But I'm really happy that you've got some experience in it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think to what we were talking about before about trying to find like the balance between this being a bottom up, like faculty and staff driven, like we value assessment versus a top down, like, but it's also an institutional priority. Then I think, Jonathan, if we could find like, if you could join the group, but then also maybe find some people in student affairs who are like more, I mean, as the dean of students, you do an enormous amount of student facing stuff. So you're like in one of those administrative roles that is also still like boots on the ground dealing with students all day, every day, whether you want to or not. But I think if we could find that balance, that might be really helpful, because I think from the academic affairs side, we have a nice balance of people who are, faculty who are doing more administrative things, Melba, who just sees everything from behind the scenes and knows everybody's secrets. Yeah, so I think that would be incredibly helpful.
Does anybody have anything else to add? Everybody's quiet. I feel like I'm in the first week of class.
Right.
Everybody's burnt out. It's the last week of the semester. They're like, done.
Well,
This is my last meeting.
So I think it's really exciting that we'll embark on assessment and outcomes work in student affairs. But I do want to remind you that you only have to assess if you have the outcomes. So that's what NETCHI says, that if you have student outcomes for student affairs, then you have to assess them. So it's okay to start small.
And I think
Thank you, Kim. We needed to hear that. Scott, did you hear that?
Yes, I think that's probably, as Jonathan already mentioned, is establishing those outcomes at first, is just sitting down and what are the outcomes of the specific areas that you really think that are the most important elements and then creating kind of a map from that and is establishing a process based upon those outcomes. But I think that's what the discussion really should start off with, is establishing your outcomes and then moving from there. And I think that's where I had mentioned the subcommittee of student affairs and you working amongst yourselves and creating those individual outcomes. And then those of us coming back together and into this larger group. So, anybody else? Elle, do you have anything you want to add?
Nope, everything sounds great. I'm excited to be involved.
Excellent. Rick, do you have anything?
Yeah, I'm excited too. I mean, we started in ESL to do assessment before assessment got going here. And we need to do more of it. We need to look at what's happening in ESL. And of course, it's a question of equity, at the college to make sure that ESL is doing its job. And so we already do certain things, but I think we need to regularize them, improve them, and get it into a whole system. And I think that's what we need to do. And I'm going to retire, so maybe before that happens.
No, why is everybody retiring? No more.
But if anyone wants me to come back and talk about it, I will, and help them to make the system. I will, because this is something I personally have been pushing through my entire career to do assessment and to make sure we're really learning what people are learning. And not just by assessing through grades, but by assessing through actual outcomes, which is what you're talking about today. It hadn't been done by assessing outcomes. And, grades mean nothing compared to outcomes. Grades can be fiddled with, unfortunately, and, and outcomes can't as much. Okay, that's my spiel.
Thank you, Rick. Anything else, Kirsten?
I guess two other just quick agenda items. One is just so an update on value. So for the value stuff, the coming year is going to be written communication. We did critical thinking artifacts over the fall. We haven't collected any artifacts this spring. It was complete chaos. But starting in the fall, we'll do written communication, which is nice because that also lines up with what we should internally be doing. So we will not be trying to assess two different skills at the same time. So everything will get streamlined. When we had this meeting last spring, we had talked about over the summer looking at the value rubrics and rewriting them to make them more like user-friendly for students and faculty internally, and like basically creating, like, if we're going to send stuff to value, they would be able to use their rubrics, but we would have an internal version that we could also use that would essentially capture the same things, but would be a little bit more user-friendly. Does this all sound vaguely familiar to people? Okay. So just because we didn't collect any written communication artifacts this spring, we don't really have anything to use to try to do that process of rewriting the rubrics. But I was thinking about reaching out to faculty who are teaching written communication intensive courses, and just seeing if we can get a handful, like maybe 15 artifacts that we could use. I'll need to talk to Bill, I guess, about finding a little bit of money over the summer if anybody on this committee is interested in maybe looking at the value rubric, looking at some artifacts, and then trying to build an internal rubric for written communication that we could then essentially next year, when we do submit stuff to value, we could use our rubric as well and see how close that I don't know why I'm struggling so much with the English language right now, but we would be able to look and see if what we built gave us more or less the same results as what value did, and then we could kind of go from there. It would have been nice to have been able to do that over the spring, but with everything else going on, that just has not been a possibility. But that seems like the logical place to start, is to test one and see if we can write it, and if we end up with essentially the same thing. So we trust our process, and then we can kind of go from there. Does that make sense to everybody, what I just said? Okay. Is anybody interested in helping me with that? Kim's like, absolutely not. Elle, yay, thank you. Okay, as long as one other person will help me, I'll send out some just quick emails to people teaching written communication and just see if anybody can send me. I'll send them a list of students that have 45 credits, so it will be essentially the same as what value would have asked for. But I don't think we need a ton of things, but if we can just get like a handful of artifacts that we could look at to norm and go through the whole process, I think that would be helpful.
And that goes back to the evaluator asking us about how many value rubrics we actually use, that there was some confusion. And we use 3 value rubrics, and we have 3 of our own. So this is a discussion that it's a bigger discussion that we're going to have is our participation in value. And are we going to continue to use those 3 rubrics, or, as Kristen stated, are we going to start creating our own that better meets our needs? We need to keep in mind that there's going to be a lot of work over the summer with regards to equity. And I've attended a few workshops and conferences on equity in assessment. And that's something that we might need to evaluate. When I was going through the first workshop, I was looking at the value rubrics, and I do see some missing areas that may not meet the needs of our equity initiative. So it's something that we may have to start examining, re-examining our assessment process with regards to equity. So we'll know more probably by the end of the summer, towards the fall, after a lot of the research has been done for whatever programs are actually selected or courses are selected, to be part of the initial pilot for the equity initiative. But I think it's exciting work, and it's going to be something that's going to kind of change the way we're already doing things, and probably enhance those programs that are a little behind the assessment game, and but it'll give them a good start. And when we look at the SECR data individually, and then you look at it as a program or a department, I think that might help us adjust the type of rubrics that we're going to end up putting together.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see, as we create internal rubrics, this is a really good opportunity to do some equity work, both in terms of how we are doing assessment, but also like even thinking about some of the language in the value rubrics, right? So that's one of the things we've looked at in some of the equity and assessment, is just like, what are you even like, how are you even presenting the criteria to students, right? Is it already like valuing one way of thinking over another, or are you using words that imply certain things, or are you just using ridiculously overcomplicated words like some of the value rubrics already do? So stuff like that. Yeah.
Could I just ask a question about why we administer these assessments where we do? Because it's often puzzled me why we ask for the artifacts from the class, you know, that's designated intensive. Like, okay, we're asking for these assessments in the written communication course that the students are taking, and yet we also have this parameter where they should be 45 credits or more through. So what is the treatment that we're evaluating? Like, are we saying that they're 45 credits in, so they've gone through some stuff, and we're hoping that by this point they know how to do written communication? Or are we saying, no, they learn written communication from that one designated class, and in that case, we shouldn't really need to single out the students that have done 45 credits or more? Because if the intervention is that single class, any student, you know, if we're saying we're going to assess you on your final essay, well, then if that's the intervention, why does it matter that they're so far along in their program? You know, like, it's kind of crazy to think that like one class in that intensive is going to give them what they need. And it seems that we make a nod to that by saying, no, we only want to look at them when they're 45 credits in, because they've got some college coursework under their belts. So if that's what we're doing, why not kind of disconnect the assessment from the class that is purporting, you know, to be like the localized place that they learn it, you know?
It is.
We always struggle to get enough artifacts.
So well, right. And I don't actually only ask the people that are teaching the intensive courses. So for artifact collection, it's literally anybody that has 30 credits. So 30 credits or more has always been for our internal core academic skills. 45 credits or more is what value asks for. So critical thinking has always been, in fact, that's part of why the last 2 years was very confusing, because global awareness was 30 credits or more, and then critical thinking was 45 credits or more. But we've never specifically asked for the classes that are designated intensives. We collect it from everybody. I was only going to ask for the written communication this spring because it's already finals, and I didn't want to just like drop this on all of the faculty. So I thought I would start with people who probably have a paper in their class, so that nobody like comes to my door with a pitchfork. That's all.
So do we then stratify those results, you know, say if we're looking at the 45 credit mark?
Yep.
Do we then look differently at students who, you know, if it's written communication, for instance, do we say, okay, these are the students who have done their written communication intensive course, and these are the ones that have done 45 credits and haven't done that yet? Because it seems to me, I mean, it's obvious they're not going to only learn that in that one intensive course, but we do have things structured as if that's true. Like, that's the only guaranteed place where they will do whatever these kind of regimented skills are. So I've always felt a little confused about this process, where if we have these intensive courses and the value of that is that we're saying this is a consistent treatment that every student's going to get, you know, whatever discipline they take that class in, you know, we're going to kind of prescribe, like, you're going to write this much, you're going to write this many pages, you know, something like that. If that's the treatment, you know, or if it's like the treatment is you stay in college long enough and we all kind of teach you a bit of writing here and there, and you just kind of pick it up as you go. And then like, what's the deal with the intensives? Like, honestly, I just am kind of confused about the process. And I suspect that if I am, then a lot of
Yeah.
people also are.
So for value, actually this year will be interesting because for the last couple of years, value has looked at critical thinking, which is not one of our intensives. So they don't care if students have taken a class. Like there is no treat. It literally is just like by the time they're about 3/4 of the way through their associate's degree, which is like a quarter of the way through, a little over a quarter of the way through what they're assuming would be a bachelor's degree. We want to see where they are. And then that's sort of held up against like 2-year schools and 4-year schools and all of that kind of stuff. But it has nothing to do with any sense of there being like a treatment in terms of the core academic skills. Internally, they don't, they ask how many credits students have earned, and they ask some demographic stuff, but they don't ask like, is this course a core intensive? Because that doesn't mean anything across, like they can't compare that to anybody else. But in terms of how we do our internal stuff, I mean, that is a good question, right? Like, what is our expectation? Are we tying it to them having taken the classes, or are we tying it to their credits? And I mean, that is not a discussion I've ever participated in. But again, a lot of this was also just sort of like, I came into this role last spring with Suzanne out on medical leave, and then a pandemic hit like a week later. So I guess what I'm saying is, to answer your question, I will need to go back and read a bunch of old emails. But I think it's a valid point, right? Like the value, what value is asking us for and what they're doing, and then what we might actually find useful internally may actually be two very different things, which could also be an argument for, like, I think we're going to end up participating in value this coming year because the state is going to pay for it and Lane is on the board. So we kind of are struggling to extricate ourselves from that process still. But I think being able to say, like, this is not actually telling us what we need to know about our students, maybe a step in the right direction. And then we could take a little bit more ownership over what it is we're being asked to do.
So from what I understand, to kind of piggyback on what Kirsten was saying, is that, so there were 3 major issues. One, that was Lane was on the board. Two, that there was the conflict between what value was looking at and what we were looking at. And the third one was Suzanne trying to streamline it and saying, okay, this is, in order to be able to accomplish both goals, I need to do it this way.
Yeah.
And there wasn't a rhyme or a reason for it other than to streamline the process, because Linda Fagan was doing a ton of work on the backside of this. Suzanne was trying to teach classes and manage the institutional assessment, and then submit all of the paperwork to value. It was just easier to consolidate it and try to align it as best as possible. We ran into several issues over the last decade, really, of that value in our own institutional assessment did not line up, and it's just been a huge headache. This entire process. And when Linda needed to be pulled away from that, and Suzanne was planning her retirement, and it was just around the time that Kirsten was just starting, Bill had asked me to look into it. And the process was, I could not believe that it was more of like a 1982 process in 2020. Linda was literally going door to door, collecting hard copy artifacts and then redacting them and then scanning each artifact and then numbering them and putting them in the shared drive. It was, and then she was hand delivering student rosters to each individual faculty that had those specific students in them. It was horrible. It was, and that's where Kelly Soretsky came in and created the dashboard for us, and that made the process streamline, that side of the process. We still need an artifact collection process, a Dropbox that those students will submit those. We have to work with IT to establish something, but the collection of the artifacts is still a headache.
Yeah,
And-
it is.
Sorry.
And
I
that's
just
to
wanted
answer
to
your,
say, I was part of that. Sorry, I don't have my camera on because my kid didn't sleep, so I look horrible. But I just wanted to say the reason for that, Scott, wasn't because there wasn't a process. Actually, there was a process. I was working with Suzanne as the co-chair of the core academic skills, and we were working together on that. That was the only way we could get people to submit them. So I don't know if you guys have ever read the book, The Myth of the Paperless Office, but it's basically all about how we do things we think will make things easier by putting them online. And then in the end, a lot of times, like the basic way becomes the way people want to do it. So when Suzanne started working with Linda to go to classrooms and collect artifacts and take paper copies, there was a significant increase in people who were willing to submit. I don't know why, but it became easier and more possible. And the online system that we had before that was not complicated and it was not effective. So it's one of those things where it's like, I don't know, why is this? But I also turned things in when it became on paper and Linda came to pick them up, as opposed to when they said, can you email us the 5 essays from this class? I don't know why, but it's something to think about because what we think makes sense sometimes like isn't what people do.
thank you, El. Because I had stepped in it way well after you had been doing it.
I know it's crazy. It's so counterintuitive. That's why I'm mentioning it, because it seems like, why were they doing this? But they were doing it because in fact, it's the only way they could get people to do things, but it doesn't make any sense. I agree. And yeah, I was part of the problem. I only submitted when Linda came to my class to get them.
Same here.
Well, it's like even that one extra step, you know, even just like emailing something or, you know, it's like the pandemic has just exposed how like borderline we all are on just like that one extra thing. So
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, I can totally, like if somebody said, all you got to do, Sarah, is email this, I'd be like, no, I'd rather go walk into the sea right now. Like, I can't do it. So I totally understand if someone's just like, you have to do nothing. I will literally come to your room. I will take them from your little hands and I will go do magic and then I will bring them back to you. I'd be like, that I can do.
That's exactly what happened. I mean, like the amount of submissions we had almost none before that. And then that significantly increased them. And I think like that book, it's a little bit old, but it's so interesting because really the whole point is about how if you want people to do stuff, you have to make it easy and you have to not assume what is easy to them, right? Like you have to let them tell you what's easy for me. You shouldn't assume what's easy for them. Because it turned out the emailing like submissions was more than people could do, which when you start breaking it down, it's like, okay, we were still on campus. So if you're on campus, you can just hit print, right? But if you have to email it, you have to go into the class, pull it, save it, upload. Like it shouldn't be complicated, but it was. So who knows?
Yeah, I mean, over the last year, the number of faculty who are like, I'm happy to submit stuff if you can just go into Blackboard and get it. And I'm like, well, I can't unless you add me to your Blackboard shell and like make me an instructor. Like that's the only way I can do it. And then like I would never hear back from people. And I'm like, okay. Well, I don't know what to tell you. Like you can literally just bulk download everything and send it to me and I will just delete the files I don't need. And people are like, nah, I don't know how to do that. Oh God.
Melba, say your comment out loud.
I think Melba, she offered a lot of faculty to use TK20 for this stuff. I think faculty having problem to basically put this little thing in Blackboard and ask a student to upload their project there. And after that, all you have to do what we did for the math, just forward them to Linda. It take like less than 1 minute to forward like over 64 project.
Yeah, yeah, so I think one of the issues before the pandemic was that not many quite a few faculty were not using Blackboard. So nothing like this pandemic to really ramp up the usage. So I think with more faculty exposed to Blackboard and using it, you put using TK20 to embed that link, you really remove the faculty from that process is set to add the link, because then the students will all upload the assignment there. And then what we need to do, and I used to do this with Linda, I would help get those artifacts from the students that were like the 45 plus credits or whatever designation they needed to have. And we would just download those. So I think that friction point will just not be the case as it like it was in the past. of course, we need to keep encouraging faculty once they come back on campus to continue using Blackboard, at least to provide content, you know, and some communication tools so that the process keeps going.
With
So hopefully that'll help.
TK20 though, Melba, do the students have to upload their paper then in 2 different places inside Blackboard? They have to put it in TK20, but then also put it in whatever Dropbox their instructor is using to do their grades?
They
Or
don't
does it
have-
all go in one spot?
It can all go in one spot, and the faculty member can download the paper or grade it right there, and the grade can now also be go into the grade book. They just, you know, there's just one little extra step, which is enable evaluation when you create the link. And then once you do that, the grade can just drop into the Blackboard gradebook. And, you know, if it helps, you know, I can provide training in TK20 for your department, you know, but it's, you know, Elle uses it, you know, and I create the assignments for all her English courses. And, you know, so far I only had one person who needed some assistance. And so that goes to say that seems like faculty are getting it. Oh, they didn't add it, which that could be another issue.
So in that case, faculty would need to know that they're going to participate in this process ahead of time, because TK20 would need to be in place, like whatever process would need to be in place before, you know, because I think sometimes what ends up happening is like, I'll get the notification to submit artifacts. I'm like, oh, let me go back and see if there's anything that would pertain to this, you know, and I haven't used a process like that. I also just, I mean, I use Blackboard for a limited number of purposes, but I don't have students submit work there. So, and I think there's going to be more of that too, where we have to be cautious about tying it to any particular tool, because looking at something like Teams and their education suite, I'm probably going to be shifting a lot of work there and having students keep their work in OneDrive. So part of me just wonders about, you know, something like the e-portfolio model of assessment, where the student is in control of, you know, like gathering all their stuff together. And then if as a college we had something like that, where it's like every student can show you, you know, like giving the students ownership of like, students, how would you show me that you think you've learned to write? You know, what is your best work? What's your journey been? What's an early thing? What's a middle thing? What's a late thing that shows you? Because I use portfolios within my individual classes. And I've really started to think about the power of those, you know, across the college, where students own that. And that's, you know, they can point to, yeah, it also helps students have ownership of what we're trying to assess. Like if a student could say, I know what my college values because I can show you my work on written communication, science and technology, quantitative reasoning, you know, right now they have no connection to that. They're like, oh, those are check boxes. And especially for programs like mine, where that's built into the program, like they don't have to think about the intensives, they just get taken care of. So they couldn't tell you, like, this is my good work on this particular outcome. Same is true for our program outcomes. Like my students currently can't point to like, oh, this is how I've learned data analysis over time, you know, or experimental design or something like that. And that's what I really like to see, is something like that, where the students are the ones that are putting forward what they think is a valuable artifact of what they've learned.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great you're going to use Teams. Just one thing I wanted to, and I made a note of that in the chat, is that we have the ability to have one central location, and in case there's a great dispute, we can always go back and retrieve information and retrieve artifacts. You know, a faculty member leaves and we have a lot of adjuncts, we have a centralized location. So I advocate for that, but I mean, I advocate for whatever works for you and for the faculty. But there is a benefit of having that centralized location. And I think that we haven't really maximized the use of TK20. So there is ability to do mapping and all of the other things, which is more for Kirsten and Scott to look at. But I like the centralized location because I've seen people say, well, the student's disputing this, and they contact me to see if I can retrieve it. So, and I can't do that when they're in like people's Dropboxes or OneDrives. And now it doesn't happen often, but it's just wanted to keep you posted on that.
Well, we've reached the end of the meeting. Everybody's kind of dropped off, and I'm sure some of you have other things to jump in for. I'm waiting for the person to come to knocking on my door to look at the construction. If, as things develop, obviously, this is back to the core group, that especially when I say things develop, it's once we get a hold of that report, I think it's probably best to, we'll send it out to everybody, read the section standard 8 that impacts us directly, and then possibly schedule a meeting a few weeks after that to give everybody some time to read it. And kind of, I'd love to hear individually what everybody's ideas are on action plans, and then go from there. So I think that's probably the best way to do this is get everybody's individual input and then come together and see what we can possibly plan for the fall and spring. Kirsten, with regards to the E-Series, have we made an announcement, or is it unofficial, or are we waiting for the new vice president to come in?
That's a good question. I don't know if Bill ever made an announcement about that or not.
Nothing came across, and I would have posted it as in the portal.
Okay.
As a course
And
announcement.
no, I
So-
don't think he did actually ever say anything about that.
I have had a couple questions of regards to the E-Series and when they're due, and each individual that questions me, I've basically stated that what Bill has said is that we're just going to put this on hold for a little bit. But as Kirsten and I have privately talked about, is that could be flipped right upside down with the new academic vice president saying, no, I want those. So the idea is to put them on hold like we did last year. They were due in the fall. They ended up being due in the fall.
Yeah.
So we might be in that same position. Obviously, with Bill's timeline on the new academic vice president, which is a fairly aggressive timeline, we could be, the new vice president could turn around and say, no, I want those in the first week of September, which would put, in my opinion, put an unreasonable amount of pressure on chairs and coordinators. So I think that if you've got work, put it aside and let it sit there. Don't throw it away. Put it aside and hold it. If you've got work that you're almost done and you thought your E-Series was needed at the end of the semester, then go ahead and submit them. I've been going in and out of the portal, removing and adding things. I know that Sheila had uploaded a lot, and I moved a lot out. I was waiting for supervisors to check off on things, it's just, there's so much going on right now, and I understand that. So I kind of checked off on all of Sheila's stuff and moved them over to the folder. So if you have stuff that's in there that you need moved out into your actual folders, I'll do that as soon as you send me an email. And if you know somebody that's got stuff in there that they want moved out, just please let me know and I'll move that stuff right away. But I think for right now, I don't have an answer on the E-Series. So it comes up in a conversation with any of the chairs or coordinators, kind of convey this, we're in limbo at the moment.
I have a meeting with Bill in a couple of minutes, so I'll double check with him, but then I'll just send an email to the chairs and coordinators that just says, like, we don't have a firm due date at the end of the semester because of everything that's going on, but you know, anticipating that the NETI report will be coming back and there will be recommendations about this, and we do have a new VP coming in, that, like, you know, if people can try to get these done before the beginning of August, or at least, you know, have something ready that if we get asked for it on the spot when Bill's replacement comes in, I will express that to everybody that, like, you know, Bill didn't ask for them, but the new person might. So, like, maybe put something on a piece of paper just in case.
All right. If no one has anything else to add, I will stop recording and we can end the meeting. Is that okay with everyone?
Sounds good.
All right. Well, thank you all for attending. I really appreciate it. And I know that we've got a lot more work to do, and once that report gets in our hands, so enjoy the break.
Break.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Oh, man.
That,
All right. Yeah, I'll talk to Bill about a couple of these things. And I'll get back to you about them.
hang on, let me stop recording. Why is it? That I don't have my report?